Hey everyone, welcome to Wildlife Inspired. I'm your host, Scott Keys. In today's video, we're going to talk about the Olympus Micro Four Thirds sensor. How does it compare to a full frame sensor? I'm going to give you a real quick video, some side-by-sides. I know you love these comparison videos, so stay tuned. Let's get into it right after this. Now the backstory for today's video, I got my hands on an Olympus camera, which I have never used in my life. And I was testing it for a client who wanted some feedback on it. I was editing some photos and I was questioning the quality of the files coming out. And I said, I'd really like to look at the camera because what I see coming from you and what comes out of my camera, the files don't feel the same all the time. So it was really interesting. I got my hands on it and I tested them side by side. Now let me just explain some fundamental differences. And this isn't an Olympus review, it's a comparison review. But with the Olympus systems in general, they're using very, very small sensors. They call these Micro Four Thirds. They are 1/4 of the size of a full frame sensor. Now, just to talk about sensor size real quick, this isn't a video about crop sensors. We're going to deal with it a little bit because one of the premises of an Olympus system is using these cropped sensors, so these crop sensors. So I'll do a quick illustration, right? A full frame camera is this big. An APS-C, like a Nikon, they would call this a DX series camera. Full frame sensors this big. The DX is like this wide. And then you get these Micro Four Thirds and it's like this wide in comparison. I'll put a chart up here so you can actually see relative to each other what a full frame, in this case I'll put the Nikon DX specs up there or size up there, relative size. And then I'm going to put this Olympus Four Thirds size up there. Now it's very important. A couple things are important here. When we talk about sensor size, we are not talking about resolution. These are totally different things. Often related, meaning the larger your sensor is, if I've got a lot of areas, in theory I could probably get more pixels or more resolution in there. I can get more, if we're just talking about a straight line across, a common number might be like 8,000 pixels across on a full frame sensor. On a Nikon DX camera, one of those crop sensors, a common number of pixels across might be 6,000. But they're not necessarily all the same. For example, I could have a full frame sensor, a big sensor with only 6,000 pixels wide. 6,000, 4,000 up, 24 megapixels. I could have an Olympus sensor, 1/4 of the size, really, really small, with the same number of pixels on it. It could have the same 24 megapixels. And in fact, the comparison I'm going to do today is going to compare two cameras that actually have pretty similar outputs. So the resolution is the same, but the sensor size is much different. So let me put in a quick illustration up here. And I want to get into this idea of magnification. So I'm going to put a full frame sensor up here. And each of those tiny little crosshairs represents an amount of pixels. I can't put 8,000 pixels up here, but let's pretend each one of these pixels each one of these squares equals about 100 pixels across. The bird magnified on that is going to appear at a certain ratio. So the bird to the frame. And if I shot this with a 300 millimeter lens on a full frame camera, let's pretend that's what it looks like. And the theory is that by using crop sensors, I get more magnification. I'm going to put another example down at the bottom of this, okay? So now let's pretend this is a crop censored camera. Notice the bird relative to the size of that image looks bigger. It looks bigger because relative to the frame, it takes up more space. But the actual size of the bird on these two images is the exact same. It appears bigger. And so that's an equivalency. It's only an equivalency. It looks like it's magnifying the bird, but it's not magnifying it. It's just projecting it on a smaller square. Think for a second, you're a painter and you've got a huge canvas and you paint something, about this big on this huge canvas. It looks really small. You paint the same thing on a canvas this big and it looks really big relative to the canvas. So that's all we're really talking about with crop sensors. I'm not going to go down a wormhole with this, but it is very relative to what I'm about to show you today. Because the theory is, with Olympus sensors, these 4/3 sensors, that they will offer me a huge benefit in magnification. So for example, the crop factor on an Olympus camera is 2 times. What that means is if I shoot a 150 millimeter lens on an Olympus camera, my field of view, the way the subject is projected onto the sensor, that really small sensor, is the same as if I projected a 300 millimeter lens onto a full frame sensor. So let me just put that comparison and show you what that might look like. So both of these, top and bottom now, they look about the same. The subject relative to the frame has about the same proportions. However, one is on a full frame camera with a 300 millimeter lens, that's the top. And on the bottom, the same proportions relative, close, is only with 150 millimeters. Well, that's great, because a 150 millimeter lens is going to cost a lot more and it's going to be a heck of a lot lighter. So let's just do that. And if the resolution is the same, which on Olympus cameras, they have a lot of resolution. There's a lot of pixels, but they're packed in really, really tight. There's some downfalls to that. We call that pixel density or pixel pitch, how big each pixel is, how tightly they're packed in. The more pixels you have, generally speaking, your image quality starts to suffer a little bit. I'm going to show you this. All of this is going to be explained through images. So if you're kind of struggling with this, if you're a brand new photographer, bear with me, because when I show you the images, it's going to make sense. So, Olympus camera, I get 2x magnification. It's not really magnification, but it's an equivalent magnification of 2x. And it's way, way lighter and it's way, way cheaper. So this has got to be the way to go. There are, however, some significant drawbacks to this concept. So I'm going to show you two lenses. I'll put these images back up at the top. Now let's pretend each lens has the same aperture, 2.8. Top is a 300 2.8, bottom is a 150 2.8. Equivalent on this Olympus sensor, this small sensor, equivalent to 300 millimeters, the aperture doesn't change. So there's another huge advantage. I get all of the light gathering ability. I get that 2.8 aperture is gathering the same light as a 300 millimeter 2.8 aperture. The aperture is what gathers the light. It's irregardless of the focal length. I've done videos on that, by the way, so if you want to poke around with aperture, I've got a whole series on aperture. So, everything looks really encouraging for Olympus cameras right now. Like, we're gathering a lot of light, we're lowering the cost, significant weight difference. Let me show you two lenses up here that I'm going to compare today with the physical weight of each and relative size differences of each, all right? So that's pretty big difference and a huge cost difference. I'll put the cost comparison up here as well. So, big cost difference. How does it affect quality? So the big part of this video is going to be about what difference, what do I lose when I do this? And I'm going to show you image quality, but I'm also going to talk about depth of field. Because while a lot of people talk about this magnification ratio, what they often forget is that the lens itself is going to produce the depth of field. The optics, so camera bodies capture what the optics see. And what you're seeing optically is not a 300 2.8 lens. You're seeing optically a 150 millimeter 2.8 lens projected onto a smaller area. Now, talked a lot, shown a couple diagrams. Let's get into some pictures. So I'm actually going to pull up, I'll put them on the side here real quick. Switch screens. Okay, on the top is the out of camera Nikon image. So that's my image with my camera, 300 millimeter 2.8. I'll put the dimensions or the resolution. I shot this on a Z6 III. It's got about 24 megapixels of resolution. I'll say about. I'm just rounding these numbers up. Don't get crazy with me. Now, below that, I am now going to put up the Olympus camera with about, I'm looking at this, I think it's 22 megapixels. It's pretty close. Maybe it's 21. It's pretty close. About the same amount of resolution, same number of pixels, but the sensor is way smaller. I just packed those pixels in tightly. What this did is with the 150 millimeter lens, you could see it projected the image on close to the same size. Now, I actually shot these at the exact same time. I call these the dualies. I put it on my dual gimbals, and one's a little higher than the other. So you can see that in the image. One image is the bird's a little lower and the other one's a little higher. It's best I could do, but it is shot at the exact same moment in time. So I know lighting conditions are perfectly the same and the animal is the exact same. So there is nothing different with this. And we're going to dig into this in just a minute. We're going to show you some of the specifics and how it changes. But what I want to do is pay particular attention to the depth of field. Now I'm cropping these down to the exact same size. And here's where I'm going to go. I'm going to pull this up. Give me 1 second here. I'll pull this up. Here we go. All right. This is my Nikon image cropped to 4,000 by about 2,800. All right. I'll put the dimensions down there below. This is Nikon Z6, 300 millimeter 2.8. The light gathering on this lens is the exact same as the light gathering on this image, which is the Olympus. Notice it is slightly smaller. So the conversion, that 2x conversion, first of all, it wasn't a perfect conversion. It was more like 1.9% or 1.9x, 1.9 times greater, not necessarily twice as big. Both shot with the exact same settings. 1/1000th of a second, the same ISO, I think ISO is 250 on this, and the aperture on both is 2.8. However, the lens from Olympus is 150 millimeters, and optically that is different. So I'm going to dig in here and we're going to talk about some of these differences. Now I'm going to go side by side. I'll put on the left, I'll put it up here, but on the left is the Z6 III, 300 millimeter 2.8, and on the right is the Olympus 150 2.8. What are the differences? Let's first look at quality. With that 300, I'm projecting a bigger image on a bigger sensor, and I would expect in that scenario to get better results. I would expect better detail. Let's see if we've got it. I'm going to go to 200% on each one. Oh, I tend to do that too often. All right, and I'm going to pull these up so you can see them pretty close to side by side. Now notice, my Nikon system did project the image a little bit bigger, so it's not a perfect even ratio. But if we can see detail on this, I can promise you, and I know YouTube comes across a little tough, I can promise you, the Nikon image is significantly better. There's some difference in color. That's just the manufacturer, the lens, and the optic quality, plus the sensors can be a little bit different. But other than that, detail is different. It's not just a little bit bigger, it's also bigger and more detailed. I think you can see that pretty clearly in this example. So let me show you the other big difference, and I'll go back to the normal magnification here. I just want you to notice bokeh or bokeh. I want you to notice the out of focus areas. Optically, a lens that is a 300 2.8 will have more out of focus areas, and the depth of field will be shallower. Did a video on depth of field. Go check that one out. The 150 2.8 has a different depth of field. That's done by the lens. It doesn't matter what the body is. The lens produces that out of focus element. And when I look at that 150 2.8, it sure as heck looks different. Let's take a couple of areas on each. So if I go in, I'll go in about 100% here, okay? Oops, let's try that one again. I want you to notice this stick right here. See how much it is in focus? But look at the Nikon. It's so blurred out, you barely notice it. If I look at these background areas over here, I see the shadows and the light. I see the light in the dark area. On the Nikon, because it's more blurred out, those light and dark areas start to melt together better, and I get a much creamier background. So, while the Olympus did project pretty close, remember we said it wasn't an exact 2x, but it was pretty close. While it projected to the same things, and I gathered the same amount of light, the actual output is different. It looks different. And part of that is just the optics of the lens itself. When we, and I'm going to use the word cheat, but when we cheat to get more magnification or equivalency, this focal length equivalency, when we cheat to do that, it will never be a perfect science. Now, if, and this is a big if the lens I chose to use on the Olympus system was, let's say, 150 150 millimeter 1.8. And I don't have the math here, but there's actually a number where it will start to even out. Then things change a little bit, because then my depth of field will change because of the lens. I would also, in that case, gather more light. I would also pay a premium on price. They don't, to my knowledge, make a 150 millimeter like f2 lens, but it would be an interesting comparison, and I can't do that for you today, all right? So I'm not able to give you that comparison. It would be a pretty neat comparison to compare, let's say, a 400 millimeter f4 on a Nikon body to a 200 millimeter f2 on an Olympus body, and see what that looks like, because that could offer you some changes in background. But I want to make this point. While they are both gathering the same amount of light, I lose that depth of field because my focal length is smaller. If you want videos, I've got videos on, there's a playlist called Photo Basics. So if you want just a background on some of this stuff, depth of field, focal length, what does that all mean? If you're a real beginning photographer, I've got some videos on that for you. But that would change this scenario. So if I had a lens, again, that wasn't a 150 2.8, but maybe it was down to 150 f2 or 1.8. There's some math there that'll tell you where it's at. Then these images might start to look a little better, but what will not change is that actual image quality, the detail that I showed you on the subject. That will probably not change too much. And part of the reason is when you have a sensor that is really small with a lot of pixels packed in, sometimes there's a degradation of quality. Now, a lot of that depends on manufacturer and lens, and there's a lot of other stuff that goes into that. If you took a sensor that was 15 or 20 years old and compared it to a modern sensor, there's huge differences in that technology. But I wanted to put that up there. I thought you might find this video interesting. So if you're an Olympus shooter, if you've got thoughts on this, by the way, please put them down below. If you know the math on some of these things, put it down below. There will be, again, at some point there's going to be some equivalency differences, but I wanted to show you just that premise around taking a lens and thinking 150 2.8 on an Olympus body is a 300 2.8 on a full frame. It is not. It is very, very different, and the outputs are very different. For the Olympus system itself, there are huge advantages. So when I'm talking huge, I'm talking significant. Let me show you what my lens that I used for this video up front, what the cost would be for the body, the lens, and the weight. And then on the bottom, I'm going to show you what that Olympus is. And you'll find Olympus systems are often very, very popular with people who no longer have the ability to carry around heavy gear or need something extremely portable, because not only is it light, it's tiny. I mean, I can remember, I don't have the camera with me anymore. I just tested it and sent it back, but I was wielding this thing with one hand and I thought it felt like a 300 millimeter point and shoot. That's how light this felt to me. Or I was carrying a 300 millimeter, but it felt like a point and shoot is probably a better way to say that. So there's just a lot of advantages to that system. But for those curious about what the drawbacks are, that is one of the drawbacks. So there's some other things in this concept, especially around using a different lens that would have a bigger aperture, but then we're getting back to adding the weight into the system again. So if we were looking at, let's say a 150, and again, they don't make the lens, but like a 150 1.8, it'd be a pretty substantially large lens. It'd be a very heavy lens. It wouldn't be as long, but it'd be very, very heavy. So that's all I got for you today. Quick comparison, 2 images, a little bit about crop sensors. I hope this made sense. Do you want me to do a follow-up on just crop sensors? I think most people watching my content understand it. Is there misconceptions out there you want me to try to clarify for you? It can actually get a little tricky with crop sensors, but there's some basic premises that everybody should understand. And for me, the idea is always when I hear people say focal length equivalency, or it magnifies, or it's just like shooting, I'm shooting a 400 millimeter, but it's just like a 600 millimeter. There's some problems with that logic. So when you hear that, you just need to take it with a grain of salt, because there are some differences. And a lot of it is just around the optics of the lens itself. So that's my video for you today. Down in the comments, you got to let me know what you thought of this one. If you're not subscribed to the channel, hit the subscribe button, like with the thumbs up. That pushes the content out for people who like bird photography, wildlife photography, and sometimes just camera information. Hit that like button, bell for notifications, let you know when I have a new video out. And as always, I hope we can continue to find inspiration in wildlife together.